Okay, while waiting for others to join, I just gonna give a brief overview on our today's webinar. So there will be an opening remarks from Sifangi, the Senior Regional Lead of GNDR for Asia Pacific and Europe regions. And we will then have three speakers who will share on the practical guide of anticipatory action and also the experience of anticipatory actions in their country. We have Takeshi Komino, the CWS Technical Unit and also ADRRN Vice President. He's also the member of the Anticipatory Action Working Group and also GNDR National Focal Persons for Japan and also member of the Regional Advisory Group of GNDR for East and Southeast Asia regions. And for the Takeshi will share on the practical guide on anticipatory action for local CSO, so that it can give an overview of what is anticipatory actions and how it is different to the DRR approach that we already knows or implement or experienced before. And then for the second speaker, there will be anticipatory actions in practice in South Asia, which will be presented by Kazi Amdadul Haq from Friendship. So he is the Director of Strategic Actions Planning and Head of CCADM, and also the Global Chair of the START Ready Committee of START Network. And for the last speaker, we will have Deborah Dian Utami from YAKKUM Emergency Unit Indonesia, where she will present the Gender Responsive Early Actions Protocol in volcanic eruption setting for inclusive early actions and also to improve the social protections program. And after the presentation from three speakers, we will have 20-minute discussions for questions and answer. And if during the presentations you have a burning questions, then you can post your questions in the chat box as well. And after the discussion, we will have conclusions and also call for locally led anticipatory actions by Tiffany Chavda, the GNDR Senior Regional Lead for Asia Pacific and Europe. Okay, yeah, so as this is the first member spotlight sessions, so there will be series of the member spotlight. The first topic is on anticipatory actions, and then the next topic will be on localizations in practice that will be done in next July, and for the next theme, it will be also based on members' interest. So we will reach out to you, or you can reach out to us if you want to share your good practices with the rest of the members. So now because people have joining, I will ask Sifangi to give her opening remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Happy. Good morning, very good morning, because I see participants from Europe. So very good morning to all of you. Good afternoon to all the participants, members, colleagues, and friends. It is a pleasure to welcome you all to this first episode of Member Spotlight series. This series is initiated on request of our members, especially in the Asia Pacific region, through various mechanisms that we have, to create a platform to learn and share from fellow members and experts, especially focusing on locally led actions, disaster risk reduction, risk-informed development, climate change adaptation, and others. Today's webinar focuses on anticipatory action in practice. We all perhaps have heard this term a lot, and more so in the context of changing climate, early warning mechanisms, so on and so forth. However, we thought that it is a good opportunity for us to learn from our fellow members who are sitting on board today, both as speakers as well as in audience, to really unfold this subject a little more as to what do we mean by anticipatory action, what is the lens that we are coming from to understand this whole term, which we call it as anticipatory action. And we thought that this would be really a good opportunity to have this webinar session, really open one, really interactive one, to understand this, both the technical side of what it means, but also through our examples and case studies by our members from CWS Japan, YU from Indonesia, and Friendship from Bangladesh. And we are really thankful to all our speakers who have come forward to take their time out, and you participants who have also taken your time out to kind of be in this first membership spotlight series. This webinar is jointly organized by GNDR and CWS, along with ADRRN, who is our member as in GNDR's member, but is also member of Anticipatory Technical Working Group in Asia. As mentioned by Happy, this is one of his kind. We would like to at least have 6 spotlight series during this year on those that our members care more, or whichever way. Let's talk, let's learn, let's share, and I think that's the motive behind this. So I'm very happy also to share that while this was meant to be for Asia Pacific, but I see members and interest from other regions as well happening, sharing and learning. And I think this is a good opportunity for all of us to listen. I'm not going to take much of the floor and much of the time because that's for the speakers today. So thank you once again, everybody, for your presence. I'm eagerly waiting to learn from all of you. So let's not wait further, and floor is yours, Happy. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Sivangi. Yeah, so without further ado, I will invite Takeshi Komino to share your presentations. Takeshi, time is yours.
Thank you, Happy, and thank you, Sivangi, for your kind introduction. And in the meantime, while I speak, when people come to the waiting room, if you can let them in, that'd be great. Okay. So everyone, hello. My name is Takeshi Komino from CWS as well as ADRRN. And in this part, I would like to explain the concept of anticipatory action and provide some practical tips for those who are willing to put this in practice. So first of all, let's cover the definition. So this comes from OCHA, and it explains anticipatory action as humanitarian intervention triggered once a pre-agreed forecast threshold is crossed. And with pre-agreed finance, it aims to prevent or mitigate the potential disaster impact before a shock strikes. So it's really aiming to mitigate the impact as much as possible. For those of us who are disaster risk reduction practitioners, I think it's easier to put it into this like disaster cycle diagram. Here's my self-made cycle, but I hope you get a sense of it, and it's probably not so different from others. And I've divided into disaster preparedness, risk reduction phase, and then the search and rescue, immediate life-saving phase, then response and recovery phases. Now, where the red mark is indicated is the onset of a disaster event. And anticipatory action targets this one segment between disaster preparedness and actual onset of a hazard. So this segment is where we are focusing and talking about. The key here is to think, what are some imminent actions you can take to protect what you want to protect? Now, taking from the technical standards document, which we will share with you a link later on from this anticipatory action technical working group for Asia Pacific. Anticipatory action, this diagram shows types of hazard anticipatory action is already being used. So to the left, you see hazards such as the climate-induced disasters, such as the typhoon, flooding, drought, Zud, that's from Mongolia, and heat waves. Volcanic eruption, although it's not a climate-induced, but it's included here. And I think there will be a case from our colleague today who will provide a case of anticipatory action with the volcanic eruption. Now, aside from these hazards, there are hazard types where anticipatory action is being explored at the moment. So these include landslides, disease outbreak, conflict, forest fire, and so on. The key is if there are imminent sort of indicators of approaching of a hazard, then it's possible to plan these anticipatory action before that hazard actually strikes. So when that lead time exists, then we can think and plan the anticipatory action. Now, some people ask whether early action is different from anticipatory action. And the response to this is that it's the same. So we shouldn't get ourselves confused with these terminologies. Anticipatory action is really gaining momentum these days. But many of these is actually not so new. For example, we all do anticipatory action in our lives. We do. Now, let's think back a little bit to the early days of COVID-19 pandemic. And I would like to ask each of you what you have done or what we have done when the cases of COVID-19 was spiking up and there was imminent risk of infection. Maybe in the chat, we will give it a minute. Could you write what actions you've taken personally in order to minimize the impact of the pandemic in your life? So we'll just give it a minute. If you can share in the chat, that'd be great. Yeah, excellent. Yes, we vaccinated, we worked from home, took children out of school. Yeah, wearing a mask, washing hands. Yeah, boosting the immune system. Absolutely. Stopping the mobility, yes. So we stayed at home. Excellent, yes. And I think these are all anticipatory action because there was imminent sort of indicator of a hazard, which is pandemic approaching. And then in order to minimize the impact, so this hazard of pandemic becoming a disaster to you, in order to minimize that impact, there are various actions that you've taken personally. So these are good examples of anticipatory action, I think. So thank you everyone for your contribution. It's great. All right. The anticipatory action that we're referring in this webinar or in our sector is not with each of the individual as we have looked in the previous slide, but with communities who are at the risk. So let's take a look at some of the examples of what are some anticipatory actions that are being done with these at-risk communities. Now, first of all, in order to reduce the impact to the lives of the people, early evacuation is a must. So there's quite a lot of focus around how to evacuate people early to safer area on timely basis. Now, also there are examples of cash assistance so that communities can purchase essential items to reduce the hazard impact for them. There are livelihood related examples too, with livestock management, for example, reducing and managing the number of livestock that you have in anticipation of a drought, for example, or protecting key farming assets, going ahead with the early harvest so that your harvest would not be affected or lost by the flood that is approaching, for example. So these are some of the examples that are being done with anticipatory action. Now, there are a variety of things that you can do with anticipatory action, depending on what the community wants to protect from the imminent risk. But there are said to be 3 key building blocks to anticipatory action. And this is taken from the ASEAN framework that is also available in the technical standards document. One is the risk information forecasting and early warning. So there needs to be these triggers to be set. Now, in other words, when will anticipatory action begin needs to be decided in prior. Now, second is planning, operations, and delivery. So there needs to be advanced planning to ensure that the appropriate actions are taken on timely basis. And the third building block is the pre-arranged finance. So it is often too late to think about money transfers when the imminent risk is already there. So it is good to think about how to make sure necessary resources are available exactly when the actions are going to take place. Now, some of the modalities that the agencies take are, for example, like a reimbursement basis, rather than trying to make a new transfer. So that kind of things is being done. Now, in previous slide, I talked about a trigger. So deciding when will anticipatory action begin. How do we set this trigger? So there are steps that earlier mentioned technical standards document outlines. One key principle here is that it always starts with an analysis. From past disaster events, we can determine what sort of damage or impact was observed with what sort of hazard. And you can further analyze the links between the extent of the hazard and the damage. So for example, heavy rainfall of 100 millimeter in a day has caused the flooding in this section of the village. So you make those correlations from previous disasters. And once such analysis is done, you can discuss with the communities and local authorities what actions need to be taken to mitigate such impact in the future. An example, when would be the most, and also when would be the most appropriate time to take such actions as well. It's also important to prioritize those who are particularly vulnerable and create a plan of action. Now, it's easier said than actually doing it, because one of the key problems that we have is that many of the areas where we work is that basic data is not available to cross-reference. For example, many countries do not have the sufficient number of the rainfall or climate observatories, and gaps in that data often makes it difficult to do the initial analysis. Now, in such case, what can be done to start planning our anticipatory action? As many communities are under imminent threat of the recurring flood, my suggestion to all of us is that we focus on the rainfall analysis locally. And I will explain this more. So as an example, I would like to share how Japan is doing this. So just as an example, Japan possesses over 7,000 rainfall monitoring stations, and which monitor rainfall every 10 minutes and which are publicly disclosed. So wherever I am in the world, as long as I'm connected to the internet, I can access these data from anywhere. There are also numerous river level observation points, and data is also obtained every 10 minutes which is also disclosed to the public. So such availability of data allows us to analyze what sort of rainfall patterns causes what sort of disasters. So in this graph that you see here, if we take y-axis as a daily rainfall and x-axis as accumulative rainfall, and if we start plotting disaster events on these lines of rainfall patterns, then we can create something called a critical line. Now, this critical line differentiates the safe zone in this graph and the danger zone in this graph. And if it exceeds this line, precautionary measures, including, for example, early evacuation, is required. So in a sense, this is a trigger. This is setting of the trigger. And there are quite a lot of analysis being done here in Japan in order to come up with this critical line. For example, one prefecture called Kochi Prefecture, they referred to the past 25 years of disaster events and analyzed the 438 disaster events, and they came up with their own critical line. I'm not saying that extensiveness needs to happen everywhere, but looking at the relationship between the rainfall patterns and the disaster events that happen leads to further understanding of what will be the critical line for your specific communities that you target, and therefore what will be the trigger. Now, once such analysis is done, then these more site-specific, context-specific triggers can be set. So, for example, there's a place called Tamanocho. The community here, the community decided their trigger would be when the river level reaches 2.8 meters and the rainfall reaches 40 millimeter an hour in low-lying flood area, or 80 millimeter or more than 3 hours of rain in non-flat areas. They will start their action. In a place called Hinataoki area near Akasaki River, they're also very context specific and precise. So they say when the river water level is predicted to exceed 4.32 meters in 1 hour, and when the water level is expected to rise to city road intersection near Mr. Yamada's storage house, then they will start their early action. As such, triggers will be different from communities to communities. And if we are, and I think this point is very important for all of us to recognize if we are to localize this anticipatory action. And the leadership needs to be taken by the local communities and authorities to make this happen. So analyzing it together with the communities, looking at the past disaster events and analyzing the rainfall patterns that led to these disaster events will enable us to think what sort of rainfall pattern will produce a disaster in this specific site. Now let's go back to a little bit to the rainfall analysis, as there is a very simple technique to do this analysis. First, whether manually or automatically, you want to capture the rainfall data of the target area. You can also make your own rainfall monitoring with the plastic bottles if you want. But these days, I think the automatic machine is also available quite widely. And with these data, you measure these daily rainfall patterns. And out of the daily rainfall records, you can determine the continuous rainfall events. So in the left list that you see on this slide, there are two consecutive rainfall scenarios that you can observe. So one is from the April 4th to April 7th, and the other from April 9th to April 12th. Now, this can be classified with daily rainfall and continuous or accumulative rainfall, which can be graphed with y-axis as a daily rainfall and x-axis as a cumulative rainfall. And you can draw a line with each of the day like this. And this line is sometimes called the snake line. Now, once you continue with these analysis in your local setting, then you can add on these rainfall patterns and graphs in the graph. And when communities observe a hazard, such as a flooding or a landslide or significant land movement, it can be plotted on a specific line. And when you classify the areas in the graph where hazard events are likely to take place, that becomes your risk areas, and lines that differentiates between this risk area and other white, this safe area, this line will be considered as a critical line. So if your projected rainfall pattern is going to exceed this critical line, then that's the moment that early action needs to start. So that sort of thinking can be derived out of these analysis. And so once you have these critical line being set from your analysis, it's possible to start planning your trigger. And for example, like if a cumulative rainfall reaches 150 millimeter, it's like if you're likely to see a significant movement of the land in the hills of the mountainous area where you work. So that means that if the rainfall projection is expected to be 150 or more, then that's when people residing in the hilly areas, they need to evacuate early. So that kind of early action can be advised and take place. Now, today is really a crash course, and we will be happy to elaborate these further in other occasions. But here are also 5 guiding questions to start your planning on anticipatory action. So the first one is, what are the anticipated recurring disaster in your target area, in the communities that you work with and for? The second is, what have been the common losses, so damage from these disasters? And can they be prevented or mitigated with early action? And yes, no. If yes, how? And the third question is, what are the mitigation actions that can be considered as anticipatory actions to mitigate the impact of these disasters? And the fourth would be, with early resourcing or financing, help the communities to take early mitigation actions? Because not every action requires significant amount of resources. I don't think communities require so much of the resource when they are actually planning early evacuation of their community. But if they're planning more livelihood protection, for example, or setting up of a specific infrastructure to mitigate these impact, then a significant amount of resources are required. So I think we also need to differentiate what communities can do with the power that they already have, and what are some of the additional resources they require in their anticipatory action. And lastly, are there forecasting information available to think about the triggers? If not, then you may have to come up with a means to measure these rainfall locally. I think many of our colleagues already do these things, and those data can help you in your analysis. I hope this is helpful, and as we'll be hearing actual anticipatory action cases from our colleagues after this, I hope that you can visualize how these concepts are actually turned into practice locally as implementation on the ground. So thank you very much for your attention. Over to you, Happy.
Thank you, Takeshi. Yeah, if you have burning questions for Takeshi, please post it in the chat box. And yeah, it's really useful to know what are the building blocks of the anticipatory actions, and also that in how to set the triggering actions, and of course, that it is also need to involve the community, and each of community might have the different triggering the different triggers for different community. So the next speaker I will call Kazi to share the anticipatory actions in practice in Bangladesh. Over to you, Kazi.
Well, thank you so much. Am I audible? And my slide you can see?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes.
First of all, thank you, Happy, and thank you, Takeshi. Very nicely you clarified the grammar of anticipatory action. And honestly, I will recap initially your thoughts and issues you mentioned. And then I will share some experiences in South Asia, as you asked me for South Asia. So one from Bangladesh, one from Pakistan. Let's start and the friendship experiences very quickly within 15 minutes. Let's start, recapitulation that definitely anticipatory reaction, an innovative and effective humanitarian approach, no question about it now, and that actually minimize loss and damage caused by different hazards, all those things. And though there are many definition at this moment, but ultimately, and Takeshi also mentioned one definition, and I actually quoted recently. There is a very I must say, a book has been published, considering all the vocabulary and everything. I give the references and you can capture. Anticipatory action is defined as acting ahead of predicted hazards, events, to prevent or reduce acute humanitarian impacts before they fully unfold. There are many organizations at this moment in this world practicing this anticipatory action, Red Cross, Red Crescent Movement, START Network, World Food Program, FAO, and UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Before getting into my detailed presentation, let me share you one statement that is evidence shows that is around 55% of humanitarian funding goes to crises that are predictable, and yet only 1% funding is organized in advance. So this is really unacceptable. We can predict 55% and we are really organized for 1%. So keeping this in mind, let's proceed ahead. This is pre-agreed predictable financing. And as I mentioned, 55% predictable, so that we can pre-agreed financing and pre-agreed plans. It's not really all of a sudden. Yes, there are some anticipated action you can take forward, fine. But to make it more structured, more effective and efficient, I would recommend we practice is really pre-agreed plans and released when an agreed trigger point reached. Keeping this in mind, if you see anticipatory action can include the development of system mechanism. And in many countries now thinking, to include it is a part of development system and mechanisms. So as Takeshi mentioned, anticipatory action, early action, there are many jargon and many word vocabulary exist, but ultimately, taking action in advance. So, Takeshi also clearly defined, what we need to consider depending on mandate, the context, hazards the people are facing, and available forecast. And that forecast available not only data, community wisdom, consultation, and history. Takeshi indicated those, and I must recommend strongly community wisdom to be translated into action is really important. And a common parameter, we must define and design some actions, and we should very clearly share the responsibility among the stakeholders, and we need to be agreed in advance. And, as mentioned, the forecast is really truly important because what Takeshi clearly defined, and scientific involvement and scientific research and data analysis is important. So for this action, practitioners need to be connected with the people who are really very much experienced and expert on scientific analysis, so that you can then articulate, and you can then define, you can then measure, we can plan in advance of what are the actions to be taken, and what the impact can be, and what financing is really important. And but anticipatory action should not be seen as a substitute for longer term investment in disaster risk reduction. Yes, it is strengthening people's capacity to manage risk, but it should not be substitute for longer term investment. And at the same time, we should keep in mind and in plan, that is, in case of any emergency, we may need to address the crisis, so that response preparation also need to be prepared in advance. So today's webinar has one objective is the increased understanding of local CHOs and of the concept and practical application of interception. I must refer two things, that is, the hazard, which really can anticipate, and at the same time, how really we can reduce the impact and what possible action can be taken. And these really three things, any community-based organization, local organization, if you ask with their language, they can able to tell you that these are the impact, these are the crises can take place. So that, and they also know what can be the action prevent the crisis and or minimize the crisis. So shifting focus from response to protecting, and we can proceed with the action with the pre-agreed plan and finance. And three things really important to keep in mind. One is, it is really faster because everything is pre-agreed. We don't need to invest time, for process, procedure, protocol, and approval, all those things. So that is faster. We can reach people in advance, and it is dignified. And at the same time, it's very much cost effective. So anticipatory action complements the wider disaster risk management cycle. And if I consider the objective number 2, what we really wanted to say, showcase local actors. In general, anticipatory action is really a locally led action, because consultation with the local people, community experts, stakeholders important. And we must need to coordinate with the local actors. Stand-alone anticipatory action is truly difficult. And above all, in advance contingency planning must. So until unless contingency planning and micro-level planning in place, very difficult to make this initiative efficient. And this is really not only the funding. There are many stepping stones, beginning from Takeshi explained, but I need to recapitulate, strategic thinking, the probable actions, impacts, process, procedure, and the plan, responsibility sharing, and finance requirements all need to be very clearly designed. But at the same time, we should not forget who is owning this anticipatory action. If the central people, the key people are owning, and if the decision-making table we are around is not going to be really efficient. So we need to make sure the people, those who are really in crisis and those who are really targeted, they need to be part of the planning process. They should own the anticipatory plan, and they should be around the decision-making table. Let me share with you as a chair of Start Ready. Start Ready is a Start Network's newest financial mechanism. We launched in COP26, 2021, and pre-position funding for predictable climate risk, and we consider local adaptation. At the same time, Local governance committee are formed in many countries. Last year, we activated this funding for 10 countries. And this year also, we are in progress for many countries, already funding in place. And it's full funds, and so that, involve local actors closely in this process. Please visit our site so that, you can learn a bit more. Now example, let me start with Pakistan. In 2021, Bright Star Development Society, Balochistan, they initiated an action to address drought, and they established cooling facilities with cold water and a place to rest. And the cooling facilities, truly helped a lot for the community in targeted areas. At the same time, it acted as an example for others could follow. And people felt that Bright Star's close consultation with the local administration and understanding of communities' needs were critical in establishing these currently appropriate services. So that is simple, a cooling facilities and with the water and resting place helped a lot. So you can visit for detailed plan what action actually they had taken and how it was effective. And I remember that Takeshi mentioned about the shelter things. A couple of years before in Bangladesh, we before the cyclone in a community, we just reinforced households. And after the cyclone, we conducted an evaluation. We realized the community where we reinforced houses, 10% affected, and community where we didn't reinforce houses is our is other community. They are affected 50%, neighboring community. So little intervention can bring big impact if it is really anticipatory action. Another point, what Takeshi mentioned, yet to be explored and in exploration, for example, human disease burden. And that also experimented here in Bangladesh by an organization. It's called Social and Economic Enhancement Program, SEEP, in July, September 2020. Start Fund and UK AIDS funded, and the 4-1 is a wing of Start Network is really helping for analysis the anticipation. So that if I tell you the crisis for dengue in 2019 during the period of which took 179 lives and hospitalized 100,000 people in a year period. And in the same period after the project, project actually implemented sensitizing 70 lakhs people, of which is 1,700,000 people, including officials, relevant government agencies, local government, medical personnel, media personnel. We really wanted to make sure all are really aware and can take action well ahead so that people are not really facing this trouble. So 100,000 people were hospitalized, 179 died. And these are the intervention we have taken: epidemiological surveillance, collaboration with the hospital for tracking, coordination with the, this is Dhaka North City Corporation, DNCC, institutional readiness, policy advocacy, mass awareness by television, radio, newspaper, leaflet, and community engagement. Result is this 1st January to 27th July of 2019, it was 100,000 people hospitalized. And after the intervention, it was only 341 in 2020. It's very significant, very significant. So on an average, so far, around 3 to 5 pounds invested per head. So this is really a big achievement. So this is what really I wanted to share. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kazi. Yeah, I think Kazi is also highlighting the same as what Takeshi has shared, that anticipatory action is based on forecasting, and also there are also establishment of the pre-arranged finance and locally led anticipatory action is not only about the funding reach to the local level, but also there should be an ownership and also a decision-making power that is owned by the community for the actions being developed, and also the strategy that being chosen. And Kazi also provide example that risk communications and community engagement is also a part of the example of the anticipatory actions activities put in Bangladesh and Pakistan. Okay, thanks so much, Kazi. And I will call Ami to share anticipatory actions in the context of volcanic volcanic eruptions. Yeah, Ami, time is yours.
Thank you, Happy. Can you go next? So everyone, we will share more on the designs of the early actions in the context of volcano eruptions. And actually, this kind of programs we will implement in the couple of months together with our partners, Plan International Indonesia, and also PPDK, the local organizations for people with disability in Klaten district. So before that, I would like to introduce about the context of this volcano setting. So a little bit context of this volcano. Merapi volcano is categorized as one of the most active volcanoes in Indonesia. Yeah, from the total of 127 volcano in Indonesia that spread in the country. And from this number, actually only 69 active volcano that are being observed by the Center for Volcanology and Geological Hazard Mitigations. The center itself is the government body that is responsible for providing warnings on the level of volcano activity. This is one of the that letter can be also become a basis when we activating the action or procedure during the emergency or before the emergency. So based on these observations, Merapi volcano actually has a period for eruptions between 2 until 7 years. So it's quite a short period. And from the experience, Merapi has ever not erupted for almost 18 years, but that's happened in the last in the past times. And Merapi volcano is quite unique because it's located in 4 different districts in 2 provinces and covering a population of 4.7 millions of people. And the last largest eruptions happened in 2010 with the volcano explosivity index reach 4, has caused about 347 people die and 400,000 people need to be evacuated. And in each of the district itself, the impact is quite huge. And currently, the status of Merapi is also already in the level 3, level watch, since 5 November 2020. This is also one of the informations that we need to take note before we consider the forecast or risk informations of the Merapi. So next slide. Yeah, so as Takeshi mentions in the first presentations, the first building blocks when we thinking about the anticipatory actions is about the risk information, forecast, and early warning. And how we can do that, we need to identify the historical disaster impact, yeah, because anticipatory action is more to protect people and asset that likely to be affected than to respond to the need that maybe emerge after the disaster happen. So, but to know when, where, and also how the hazard will pose high danger and what suitable actions need to be taken for anticipatory actions, there are several information that need to be collected. So the first one is the historical disaster impact. When talking about the Merapi eruption in 2006, even though the government already ordering the immediate evacuations for the community that living close to the Merapi, many villagers, many local community return to their village. Their fears that the livestock or crops being vulnerable, and the risk of theft is also increased. And in 2010, aside from the loss of life, damaged houses or farmland and forests, there's also another impact that happened during that time. So the Disaster Management Agency in Yogyakarta reported that there are about 500 cases reported that the eruption survivor suffering from minor to severe psychological problems. So this is also the informations of impact that we need to collect before we can identify together the pre and decide the pre-agreed triggers. Aside from the disaster impact informations, understanding the warning system already established in the area is also important. For example, in this case, the level of volcano activity and the sign of eruptions. The Center of Volcanological and Geological Hazard Mitigations has published there are 4 levels of volcano eruption activity, from normal, advisory, watch to warning. So aside from this alert from the governments, this is also to we need to see also the signs of eruptions and understanding the disaster risk assessment and contingency plan from the area, because for example, Merapi eruption in 2006 and 2010, there is a different timeline between when the governments increase the level of Merapi from watch to warning. In 2010, it's only 1 day's period. So it means that if we want to do the anticipatory action, we just have one day to do the anticipatory action. While in Merapi eruptions in 2006, the level of volcano activity increased from watch to warning at least 4 days before the big eruptions happen. So this is also one of the things that we need to consider when we want to have anticipatory actions to be implemented during that golden times. And the others informations that we need to collect and sometimes miss is the information from the community, especially from the most at-risk community, from all the peoples, from people with disability, or from women and any marginalized groups. This is for informing the critical scale that require protective actions. And we, together with the partners, we will adapt the approach of the view from the front lines when we have community consultations for this to understand what kind of vulnerability felt by different peoples, and then the level of participation, so they not only become the object to be protected, but they also can be the subject to protect their environments, their community, their families, and especially the most at-risk groups. The next slide. This is the example of historical data. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah, this is the example. Like we can use the historical data, for example, for hot cloud distributions to see where the area highly affected by the eruptions from the last disasters, and also map of the disaster-prone area from the 5 kilometers zone from the summit, and then 10 kilometers, and outside the 10 kilometers, including the area that is likely to be affected by the secondary hazards such as the lahar and flood, something like that. And next. So we will focus on the Klaten district. This is one of the district that is also affected by the Merapi volcano if it erupted. And based on the contingency plan that already formulated, the hazard of Merapi eruption is considered high probability. It means that it can be happen in every 6 months to 1 year, and the impact can also cause it can affect about 50 until 80% of Klaten area. And the impact of Merapi can paralyze basic service, especially for the older people with disability. Noting that in Klaten itself, the numbers of older people population is the 4th rank in Central Java province, and 54% of this number is women. But the challenge that we face when we have like a risk assessment and even observe the contingency plan is that the update of the numbers of all the peoples and most at-risk people with chronic disease and etc. Is still not yet updated, or the number is different between the different government agency. The other thing is about the accessibility, the lack of ramp and light in public halls, which is also become evacuation centers becomes the challenges, and the evacuations road is also become a challenges when we will have a like a quick response after the warning provided by the governments. There's also a challenge on the lack of understanding of gender roles and how this could be shifted during the disaster, and lack of the attentions to the needs of the older peoples, women and girls with disability. And this means that to provide the gender responsive anticipatory actions, we need to have the data that already represent the different capacity, needs, and vulnerability from the different kind of people. So from this point, from this YU and together with the partners, we try to increase the roles of older people associations and also organization of people with disability in the area, which is likely to be affected by the Merapi eruptions, for them to also involve in the data collection process. So we need to refine the data collection tool to be user-friendly, so they can be part of the facilitators or enumerators that collecting information from their community. There will be also capacity building for data collection teams, including the older people association and organization of people with disability with gender balanced compositions. And for the planning data collection process, we need to agree on the schedule, sampling methods, and the numbers of targeted respondents, support needed from the co-facilitators, because our organization will play as a co-facilitator instead of the primary facilitators. And then from that information, from the data that we collect from the community and combine with the forecast from the governments, historical impact data from different stakeholders, from researcher, academics or university, we try to formulate the action recommendations and stakeholder mapping based on this analysis. And the next thing is that the most at-risk group led by the Older People Association and organization for people with disability involved in the advocating the government to provide the to provide and complement the anticipatory action that can be done in the community. So potentially the anticipatory actions can be, for example, the next slide, please. Yeah, like Takeshi mentioned before, caste transfers, because like we know from the historical from the last eruption history, that the most of the villagers return to their village because they worry their livestock being stolen and something like that. So this is also important things that we need to consider when having identifying the anticipatory actions, for example, using the caste transfer to ensure the farmer can evacuate their livestock, and the use of different accessible communication channel to spread the real-time informations, and it is also consider the information for different kind of people's, for example, for older people, maybe radio can be one of the example to disseminate informations about the volcano progress, and ensuring the evacuation center, the evacuation route, and early warning tools are in good position and conditions. And as in Yogyakarta and in Central Java, there are sister village. So it's not only that the village that will likely affected by the volcano eruption that need to be ready, but the sister village need to ensure also the basic service has been prepared during this critical time. And the other thing is that adapting the social protection program in crisis context. For example, the conditional cash transfer for poor community livelihood support that the governments already have in place. How can it be adapted during the crisis times so it can reduce the impact of the disaster, especially experienced by the most at-risk groups. So I think that's all that we can share from our perspective. In conclusions, anticipatory action doesn't mean that it will only be done by one organization, for example, CSO. It become the responsible of CSO. No, but it can be done through the collaborations of different stakeholders, because every stakeholders have their own roles, including when discussing about the pre-agri finance. Thank you so much, Happy.
Thank you, Ami. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I think it's also echoing what Kazi and Takeshi already shared before, and also that the trigger should also be agreed not only based on the forecasting, but also the local wisdom that the community have based on their experience with the Merapi eruptions. They also have able to read the sign of the nature. I think you also implicitly talk about it, and also that the how the needs for the anticipatory action should also be discussed together with the community. All right, thank you. Do you have any questions for the three speakers? Pooja?
Yes. Can you hear me properly? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for your very insightful and very comprehensive presentation. In the first presentation, I was more of clarified by Mr. Takeshi on anticipatory action, and there is a thin line between the preparedness and anticipatory action that he clarified. But when I came to the second presentation, Mr. Kazi presented some practices from Bangladesh, and he also presented some of the actions or interventions on some of the areas in Bangladesh on anticipatory actions. However, I found that, or I realized that those interventions that you listed are more of preparedness or preparatory action rather than the anticipatory action. I mean, just to clarify or make me clarify myself, I would like to hear from you, Mr. Kaji, whether they were actually the anticipatory actions, or how do you differentiate these interventions that you listed as anticipatory actions, not as preparedness work? Thank you.
Very good questions. Anticipatory reaction, Takeshi also smiling, so that please don't hesitate to contribute. Anticipatory reaction actually at the same time are complementing to preparedness. And there are anticipatory actions, there are some actions and some incidents you can't see and you can visualize, but you can calculate and you can analyze, and the situation you can identify what really can happen and what can be the impact, and how people will be impacted, affected, something like this. And considering that proper plan to be prepared and proper proper plan to prepare at the same time, considering plan, responsibility, and financing. So preparedness, yes, to some extent you can indicate it as the preparedness, but preparedness a bit preparedness is not has a very structured intervention. Structured intervention and financing in position is really precondition for anticipatory action, so that it's complementing each other. Early action, preparedness, anticipatory actions, these are complementary action. So it's very difficult to distinct these things, but all the preparedness, the way we let me give an example. The community, government, and some other institution for a certain community, so that flood coming, they are taking some preparation. The preparation for boat, preparation for a shelter, preparation for protection, something like this. So if this preparation is not well analyzed, based on the forecasting, based on the projection, and if not really clearly defined how really this investment or preparedness contribute for saving lives or for preventing some incidents, something like this, that this is difficult to define it as anticipatory action. So finally, I must conclude the preparedness, honestly, to some extent, is really contributing to the anticipatory action. Is it okay, Pooja?
Yeah.
Maybe,
Thank you so much for this.
maybe I would also like to complement what Kazi has said. I think it's safe to say that without preparedness, there is no anticipatory action. I think agencies like ourselves need to be mindful of that. Sometimes, we try to simplify things too much for our own sake, for our own operational sake. But a lot of, as you have heard throughout today's webinar, a lot of preparation, analysis, and pre-planning with the communities needs to be done in prior in order for a proper anticipatory action to take place. So it cannot be externally infused to communities. It needs to be led by the communities, and that preparedness action is critical in getting that foundation to be set for anticipatory action to be done.
And one thing, cyclone recently in our south, Myanmar, Bangladesh, and definitely had to face a cyclone. And because of cyclone, many people, family, we evacuated, from the community, from their shelter, something like this. This is the cyclone season, and we got the, indication in a week, 2 weeks before. So this is also an anticipatory action. This is also a preparedness, evacuation. But to make it meaningful, effective, efficient, and to make it really in a comprehensive way, so an action plan is needed. So that action plan plus responsibility share plus financial implication, if not necessarily every anticipatory action needed financial implication. There are some anticipatory action you may take, which may not need financial input or funding. So this is the answer, what really I feel. What do you think? It's okay?
Thank you so much, Raji and Takeshi. Thank you so much for the clarification.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Pooja. I hope it's clarify your questions and also for everyone as well. I will call Sifangi to give us a concluding remark and also call to action for the locally led anticipatory action.
Yeah, thank you, Happy, and thank you all the speakers. I mean, I was just noting down some of the key points that our speakers really kind of, they were all thought-provoking, and they were definitely kind of, things that we need to think while we start really looking at this subject called anticipatory action. And I think I'll begin with the last point, which was mentioned by Takeshi, is that without preparedness, there is no anticipatory action. And that's the fact. I think within the gamut of the emergency preparedness that you do, I think anticipatory actions requires to be inbuilt and has to be substantiated with lots of data, lots of planning processes that both Kazi and Amy spoke about. So very interesting, I would say personally, this particular webinar was, and some of the key notings that I was making and which really kind of appealed me, and I'm just putting it from my side, and I hope the audience also likes it. That anticipatory action should not be seen as a substitute for long-term investment in DRR. Very well said, I think. Instead, it should aims to strengthen people's capacity to manage risk. And I think this is very, very pertinent. And that's where we all are coming from the sector that we work. And we want the local leadership, as what Takeshi-san was mentioning, and also Emi and Kazi was mentioning through their presentation, that we require to nurture the local leadership. We need to kind of prepare them and kind of train them how to use this forecast, how to understand this early warning systems, how can they work in tandem with their governance mechanisms and actors, along with the CSOs, how they can. So it's not one person or individuals or community, this thing. While we say it's a community-led action, but I think there is requirement of coherence, both in terms of strategies as well as the actors who will have to come together. So having said that, I think the other point that was really very, and I'm just highlighting what I have picked up, is that locally led anticipatory action should not be just about ensuring funding. It's more important who is owning this anticipatory actions and strategies, and who is around the table to make that decision. And I think this is very close to both GNDR and ADRRN and colleagues who are mentioned here. We would like the local leadership to take action. We would like women, we would like children and youth to be able to participate in the decision-making process in terms of anticipatory action as well. I think some of those 5 questions by Takeshi-san is really very pertinent, and I think that's homework perhaps for all of us to kind of see how we can apply, or how can we respond to those questions, and can we make our anticipatory action and mechanisms more robust. So those were really critical for kind of start thinking about building anticipatory action if we have not. And yeah, the 3 building blocks, I think, which was touched upon by both Takeshi-san and Amy, on how to build the blocks for anticipatory action as we go ahead. Nothing is easy. I think it's more of it's really very hard work which goes with the community and the CSOs. But I think this is what is required, looking at the statistics which were shared earlier by Kazi on We are able to predict 55% of the disasters, but we are not really able to kind of, work at least 1% or towards 1%. So I think very, very important statistics there. So I think this are only some of the things. I can't kind of, and pardon me if I have not kind of mentioned any point that you thought as speakers was very important to capture, but this was really important that I see for our members. And Pooja, thank you for your question, because I think that's where the dilemma is, that what is emergency preparedness and what is anticipatory action. I think these are the kinds of questions that we should ask in these forums, and that's why this series is very, very important to really brainstorm and get inputs from other colleagues who are implementing in different scenarios or in the same context as you are. And don't stop asking questions, because that's how we learn and we share, and that's the purpose of this particular series as well. Having said that, as a head of a global program lead and also as senior lead for Asia Pacific, I come back to GNDR from student to now taking a little lead position. I think soon we are going to release a guide on anticipatory action. This is part of one of the project output, or local leadership for global impact. And we hope that this guide will give you further guidance as to how you can do the locally led anticipatory action. However, as GNDR, we already have kind of 5 points that we have we have kind of summarized it as a part of our advocacy campaign on how locally led anticipatory action, what it means for us as an advocate for that, and how do we ensure that we don't leave anybody behind. So those call for actions are for the decision makers at the national and international level, and we hope that you can promote more of this anticipatory action and the purpose behind that in your country and the setting and the context that you are working for. So first is, of course, the strengthen partnerships and collaborations with local actors and structures. The second call is to invest resources and financing for early action at the local level. The third being ensuring inclusive locally led coordination. Fourth, investment in strengthening existing local capacity and collective learnings. And the fifth one is include local actors in all anticipatory action policy decision making. I think while we are talking about localization, we are talking about empowering people, we are talking about creating those enabling mechanisms for the local people and local actors to take decisions to save and protect lives of the communities most at risk. So thank you, everyone. I think we still have 4 minutes for our closure. We will use this opportunity to kind of roll out a poll for everybody as a feedback and honest feedback as to if you think that this was really helpful for you. So may I request Happy that before we close, if you can kind of put the poll, and request every member here to kind of feed in for this session. Thank you so much.